Park an American Peterbilt next to a European Scania, and you're looking at two machines built for exactly the same job, hauling 40,000 pounds of freight down a highway, day after day, year after year. But one of them has a hood stretching 6 feet out in front of the windshield, and the other is a flat wall of glass and steel. Ask drivers why, and you'll hear it's style or tradition. The real answer comes down to a single law passed in 1982. And before that law, American highways look completely different. If you're old enough, you already know this. Because there was a time when the flat-nosed truck wasn't the European truck. It was the American truck. Go back to the 1960s and 70s, and the interstates were full of them. The Kenworth K100 with its towering flat face. The Peterbilt 352, the one drivers called the pacemaker. The white Freightliner cabovers hauling produce out of California. The International Emeryville. These weren't oddballs. In some fleets, they were the majority of the trucks on the road. Hollywood noticed too. When the television show BJ and the Bear needed a truck with personality in 1979, they didn't pick a long-nosed conventional. They picked a Kenworth K100 Aerodyne, flat face and all, and put a chimpanzee in the passenger seat. The industry called this design the cabover engine, or cabover for short. The name tells you everything. Instead of the engine sitting out front under a hood, the entire cab sat directly on top of it. The driver climbed up a ladder of steps, swung himself around the steering wheel, and sat almost directly over the front axle with the massive diesel rumbling away underneath the seats. Anyone who drove one remembers the details. The big hump between the seats, the doghouse, covering the top of the engine. In summer, it radiated heat through your right leg for 10 hours straight. Getting back to the sleeper meant crawling over it. Team drivers swapping seats at 70 miles an hour learned a kind of choreography over that hump that no one ever taught in driving school. And up front, there was nothing between you and whatever the road delivered. Just a windshield, a thin sheet of steel, and the pavement rushing by a few feet below your boots. Drivers joked that in a cabover, you were the first one at the scene of the accident. Now, nobody designed a truck like that for fun. Sitting on top of a hot, vibrating engine riding directly over the axle that hits every pothole first is not anyone's idea of comfort. American truck makers built cabovers for one reason, and it's the same reason Europe builds them today. The law measured the whole truck. Before 1982, there was no single national rule for how long a truck could be in the United States. Each state set its own limit, and most of them capped the overall length of the entire rig, tractor and trailer combined. In many states, that number sat somewhere between 55 and 65 feet, bumper to bumper. Cross a state line, and the rules changed with it. This created an absurd patchwork. A rig that was perfectly legal rolling out of a warehouse in Ohio could become an over-length violation the moment it crossed into Pennsylvania. Dispatchers kept charts of state limits pinned to the wall. Some carriers ran different equipment on different lanes just to stay legal. And when President Eisenhower's interstate highway system started stitching the country together in the late 1950s, the problem only got worse, because suddenly one truck really could run from coast to coast, through a dozen different rule books on a single load. Think about what that means for a trucking company. If the whole vehicle can only be 60 feet long, then every single foot of tractor is a foot you can't use for trailer. A long, handsome hood with a big chrome grille meant 6 to 8 feet of cargo space thrown away. And freight companies don't get paid for hoods. They get paid for what's in the box. So the math forced everyone's hand. Squash the cab, put it on top of the engine, and a tractor that would have been 25 feet long becomes maybe 17. Those extra feet went straight into a longer trailer, which meant more pallets, more freight, more revenue on every single run. Fleets that hauled cross-country, where they had to satisfy the strictest state on the route, bought cabovers by the thousands. It didn't matter that drivers grumbled about the ride. The tape measure made the decision, not the driver. Then, at the tail end of 1982, Congress changed the tape measure. It was called the Surface Transportation Assistance Act, and buried inside it was a quiet revolution. Instead of letting states cap the overall length of a rig, the federal government standardized the rules on the interstate system. States had to allow trailers of at least 48 feet, later stretched to 53. And critically, on those highways, they could no longer limit the total combined length of a standard tractor trailer at all. The trailer was now regulated on its own. The tractor could be as long as anybody wanted. Overnight, the hood became free. A company could buy a conventional tractor with a big, comfortable cab, a full-size sleeper, and a long nose, and still pull the exact same 53-foot trailer as everyone else. The entire reason the cabover existed in America evaporated with the stroke of a pen. The results were brutal and fast. Through the 1980s, cabover orders collapsed. By the 1990s, they had all but disappeared from American dealer lots. Freightliner, Kenworth, and Peterbilt kept a few flat-nosed models alive, mostly for export markets. But on the American interstate, the long hood took over almost completely. An entire species of truck, once the backbone of the industry, went extinct in about 15 years. Not because it stopped working, because the law that created it stopped existing. But here's where the story splits in two. Because across the Atlantic, that law never went away. It got stricter. The European Union caps the overall length of a standard tractor trailer at 16.5 meters. That's about 54 feet, bumper to bumper, for the entire rig. Remember, in America, the trailer alone gets 53. A European hauler is fitting his whole truck, engine, cab, sleeper, and trailer into roughly the space an American gets for just the box. So European engineers are still solving the exact problem American engineers faced in 1965. Every centimeter of nose is stolen from the cargo, which is why a modern Scania, Volvo, or Mercedes-Benz Actros looks the way it does. A flat face, the engine tucked underneath the floor, and the driver perched high above the front axle. It's the Kenworth K100 logic, refined for 50 more years. There are other quiet pressures too. A lot of European freight rolls onto ferries crossing the English Channel, the Baltic, the Adriatic, and ferry operators charge by the meter of deck space. A shorter tractor is a cheaper crossing, thousands of times a year. Toll systems in several countries factor in vehicle dimensions as well. Everywhere a European hauler turns, length costs money. The working life is different too. European rules cap a driver at 9 hours behind the wheel most days, with a mandatory 45-minute break after 4.5 hours, and the average haul is a few hundred kilometers, not a few thousand miles. Many European drivers are home every weekend, some every night, so the cab doesn't need to be a rolling apartment the way an American sleeper does. It needs to be an efficient workplace. And to be fair, the Europeans have made those flat cabs remarkably civilized inside, with flat floors, standing headroom, and fit and finish that surprises American drivers the first time they climb into one. But the strongest argument for the flat nose isn't money at all. It's the streets themselves. American truck routes were laid out in the age of the automobile, with sweeping interstate ramps and truck stops the size of small towns. European trucks deliver into cities that were laid out in the age of the horse. Narrow medieval streets in the old centers of towns, tight roundabouts every few kilometers, loading docks squeezed behind buildings that went up before anyone imagined a 54-foot vehicle would need to reach them. A cabover, with its front wheels almost under the driver's seat, can turn dramatically tighter than a long-nosed conventional. The driver sits right over the corner of the vehicle, looking straight down at the curb, threading a rig through gaps that would leave an American conventional stuck across 3 lanes. Meanwhile, America went the other direction, and it's worth being honest about why. Once the length limit vanished, the long nose didn't win on cargo math. It won on human beings. Start with the ride. In a conventional, the driver sits behind the front axle, cushioned in the middle of the wheelbase with a few thousand pounds of diesel engine out front soaking up the impact before it ever reaches the seat. In a cabover, the driver sits on top of the front axle. Old cabover drivers describe it the same way almost every time. You didn't ride over bumps, you got launched off them. 10 hours of that every day for a career. Then there's the engine itself. In a cabover, it lives under the floor, inches beneath the seats, radiating heat through the doghouse cover all summer and filling the cab with noise and vibration all year. In a conventional, it's out front under the hood, behind a firewall, where it belongs. Drivers could suddenly hold a conversation or sleep in the bunk without a 15-liter diesel idling under their pillow. And that sleeper matters more in America than almost anywhere on Earth because of the distances. A haul from Los Angeles to Chicago runs over 2,000 miles. Drivers cross the entire state of Wyoming on Interstate 80 and see more antelope than towns. For weeks at a time, these trucks are the driver's house. Bed, kitchen, office, all rolling down the highway. When the trucking industry started struggling to recruit drivers, the big, comfortable conventional with the walk-in sleeper became a hiring tool. Nobody ever signed on with a fleet because of the trailer. But those same magnificent American distances come with a cost that European drivers rarely face, and it's something the old hands take seriously. Out there between Cheyenne and Salt Lake City in January, when a storm shuts down Interstate 80, help is not minutes away. It can be hours, sometimes longer. Drivers have sat stranded on closed highways overnight with the temperature far below zero, and the hard rule of a stopped truck is that once the engine quits or the fuel gels, that big steel cab turns into a freezer. During the Buffalo blizzard a few years back, people were trapped in their vehicles for over a day, waiting for rescue that couldn't get through. Which is why, if you ask veteran drivers what actually lives behind their seat, the list is boring and it never changes. Water, food that doesn't freeze solid, and some way to stay warm that doesn't depend on the engine running. A lot of them have quietly added a thermal bivvy to that kit, and the one that keeps coming up is called TerraShell. It's basically a full-body sleeping bag made of reflective material that bounces your own body heat back at you. No batteries, no fuel, nothing to break. Folded up, it's smaller than a soda can, so it disappears into a glove box or a door pocket until the one night you need it. Plenty of folks keep one in the pickup and one in the wife's car too, for the same reason you carry jumper cables. You'll probably never use it, and that's the point. If you want to look at it, there's a link in the description below. It's a small thing, but it says something about the American trucking mindset that shaped these machines. Out here, the truck has to take care of the driver, because for 1,000 miles at a stretch, nobody else will. Now, back to the trucks themselves, because the comfort story doesn't end with the ride. There's the shop floor too. Working on a cabover meant tilting the entire cab forward on hydraulic rams to reach the engine. Everything inside had to be secured first. Coffee cups, logbooks, the contents of the sleeper, or it all avalanched into the windshield. Mechanics tell stories about cabs tilted in the rain with a driver's whole life dangling inside. On a conventional, the mechanic pops the hood or tilts the whole fiberglass front end forward in one motion, and the engine sits right there in the open air. 15 minutes into a roadside repair, that difference stops being trivial. Then there's the crash. In a conventional, there are 6 feet of frame, engine, and steel between the driver's knees and whatever the truck hits. In a cabover, there's a bumper and a windshield. Modern European trucks have engineered their way around a lot of that with reinforced cab structures and crash testing, but ask an old American driver why he was glad to see the cabover go, and safety usually comes up before comfort does. And there's one more piece of this puzzle, the one almost everybody gets backwards. You'd think the flat-nosed European truck looking like a slab of plywood pushed through the air would be the inefficient one, and the sleek, long American hood would be a styling indulgence. Strangely, the instinct is half right. That flat face really is an aerodynamic disaster. A cabover shoves a vertical wall through the wind, and at highway speed, air resistance eats fuel faster than almost anything else. The long American hood, especially on modern aero tractors like the Freightliner, Cascadia, or the Kenworth T680, slopes the airflow up and over the windshield gradually. Same horsepower, same load, and the conventional slips through the air measurably better. This matters enormously because fuel is one of the largest costs in trucking, often rivaling the driver's own wages. American fleets obsess over tenths of a mile per gallon. They add side skirts to trailers, trailer tails, low rolling resistance tires, Anything to shave the fuel bill. The sloped hood is part of that same arsenal. So why does Europe, where diesel costs roughly twice what it does in the United States, tolerate the worst aerodynamic shape in trucking? Because the arithmetic still favors cargo. A European hauler who gave up a meter of trailer for a sloped nose would lose more money in freight than he'd ever save in fuel. On top of that, European trucks are speed limited to 90 kilometers per hour, about 56 miles per hour, and drag punishes speed above all. An American truck cruising at 70 across Nebraska pays a much bigger wind bill than a Volvo trundling along at 56 through the Netherlands. Each continent optimized for its own rulebook, and each got the right answer to a different question. Storage is the piece that separates casual truck campers from full-time cab dwellers because the space itself is tiny. Most sleeper compartments run about 80 inches long by 40 inches wide, but the ceiling height is often 6 feet or more, which means there's a ton of usable airspace that most drivers waste completely. Cargo nets are the first trick, mounted to the ceiling with small hooks or eye bolts. A mesh net creates an overhead hammock for clothes, towels, sleeping bags, and jackets. Everything stays accessible but off the floor and out of the way. $15 and 20 minutes of installation. Below the bunk, drivers build sliding drawers using lightweight plywood and repurposed kitchen drawer slides from a hardware store. Pull-out compartments for tools, cookware, cleaning supplies, and personal gear. Some build a raised platform bed with the entire space underneath, dedicated to organized storage bins. On the walls, magnetic strips hold knives, tools, and small containers. Adhesive hooks handle hats, keys, and headphones. Every square inch gets a purpose. It's the same philosophy you see in yacht design or Japanese micro-apartments, just applied to a Freightliner Cascadia. The before and after is what really gets people. You see the starting point, a bare metal sleeper compartment with a thin factory mattress, a couple of cubby holes, and exposed wiring. Then you see the finished product. Warm lighting from LED strips tucked behind trim pieces. A clean countertop with a sink and stove. Curtains on the windows. A thick mattress with real bedding. It doesn't look like a truck anymore. It looks like a very small, very efficiently designed studio apartment that happens to be bolted to a diesel engine. And here's where the full picture comes together. An owner-operator who lives out of their truck full-time can save between $30,000 and $50,000 a year in motel, restaurant, and shower costs. Over a 5-year driving career, that's potentially $250,000 kept in their pocket instead of handed to truck stop chains. But drivers who've done these builds will tell you the money is only part of it. There are entire YouTube channels, Facebook groups, and online forums where thousands of drivers share parts lists, wiring diagrams, and lessons learned from failed installations. Somebody asked about the best 12-volt cooler for a Kenworth T680 sleeper, and within an hour, there are 30 responses from people who've tested half a dozen models. They know which truck stops are friendly to overnight parking and which ones knock on your door at midnight. They know which rest areas have covered picnic spots for cooking when the weather turns bad, and which ones to avoid entirely. That knowledge gets passed around in group chats and forum threads like a secret handbook for the road. Talk to any trucker who's done a full sleeper build and you hear the same thing. They show it off the way a homeowner shows off a renovated kitchen. There's genuine pride in the craftsmanship, even when the craftsmanship involves zip ties and Velcro. Drivers aren't waiting for companies or truck manufacturers to give them better living conditions on the road. They're building those conditions themselves, one weekend project at a time. A $200 diesel heater here, a 5-gallon water system there, solar panels on the roof, and a thermal bivvy behind the seat for when everything else fails. Layer by layer, they're turning workspaces into homes. If you want to see the full builds and gear lists drivers are actually using, click the video on screen. We go deeper on the electrical setups and show you exactly how to wire a secondary battery bank without frying your truck's system.